Hey, thank you for downloading the Garden Fork Radio podcast. If this is your first time here, I appreciate you taking the time to check us out. It's an eclectic mix of DIY-ish how-to stuff that pops into Eric's head. And I have my friends on and we talk about cool stuff. Today we're going to talk about worms, invasive worms, with Erin from The Impatient Gardener. Welcome.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for these donuts.
I wish I had provided those.
my neighbor was going to the orchard nearby. I run their dogs. I hike with their dogs and my dogs all in the woods. And she's like, "We're going to the orchard. What do you like?" I said, "I'd like 2 of those donuts." Cider donuts are good.
Those are good neighbors.
So we have some kind of interesting stuff to talk about. Invasive worms and invasive plants. So Erin, anything new with you?
Well, yes. Unfortunately, there is something new with me, and it's nothing good that's going on in my garden.
I've been following you on Facebook, and some of the posts, they make complete sense to me, but people are like, "What? A worm?"
Yeah. So, well, actually, first of all, I found these worms. I work for one of our Master Gardener projects. We manage a garden in downtown in the city where I work. And I was down there and I was doing some maintenance and this worm came up. And I immediately looked at it because it was not like other worms I had seen before. And we've been hearing a lot about something called a jumping worm, an Asian jumping worm. There's about 80, every region seems to have a different common name for these things, but they're strange worms and they're pretty bad. And I thought I saw one and I kind of freaked out, which is ridiculous with a worm, right? But you know, I've been hearing all these bad things about these worms and I was just mostly upset and disappointed that I had found them so close to home in this garden that we work at, because we knew they were around us, but we had not yet found them in that city. And we hadn't found them in actually this whole portion of our county. So we thought maybe we could push it off for a little bit. So that was an unfortunate discovery.
And you live in Wisconsin, for everyone wondering.
Yeah, right. Thank you for that. Yeah, I live in Wisconsin. So do you want me to kind of go into a little bit about what's the problem with these worms?
Yeah, I'm actually, you are the first time I've ever heard about this, actually.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting because these worms, and I will find the scientific name for these worms. It's Amanthus. It's Amynthas, and then there's 2 varieties that go from there, but that's the genus. And these worms are believed to have come, like a lot of invasive species, from somewhere in Asia, and they probably came in shipping pallets, or who knows. I mean, of course, with all the, there's so much that happens with trade that invasive species come in all the time. So these invasive species actually have been in plenty other places in the United States for a long time. They're known as, some people call them Alabama jumpers because they were in Alabama. They've been in the Northeast for some time. It was, I believe, 2013 they were first found in Wisconsin. And what's interesting is that when you Google jumping worms, most of the time, the information you find is from Wisconsin. So a lot of people think they landed here first, which actually isn't the case. But I think it's most of the research on them is being done in Wisconsin because people are very worried about our forests.
Yep.
And what they can do to our forests. And agriculturally, they could cause a huge problem for agriculture. So I believe that in Wisconsin, it might just be that the government is dedicating more resources to letting people know about these things, and so that's why a lot of the information that you can find on the web is Wisconsin related. They are all over the Midwest. They've been found in Oregon, and like I said, they've been in the Northeast and the South for a bit of time.
So why are they bad?
Right. So great question. So these worms, they hang out just on the very top layers of soil. They don't other earthworms, which one of the things I learned, interestingly enough, is that there are no native earthworms in the United States. All of our earthworms are technically invasive species. It's just that they've been here for so long. They came in around the turn of the century.
Yep.
They've been here for so long that we assume they are native species. So, but what these worms do differently is they just hang out on that top layer of soil. They never go down to sort of aerate the soil the way that the earthworms that we're used to do. And, earthworms help pull down all those nutrients down to the roots of plants. And these jumping worms, they just hang out on that top layer. And what they do is they are voracious eaters. And they just process this material so quickly that basically what they do is they pull out all the nutrients. There's nothing left for the plants. And on top of that, they turn the soil into crumbles. They describe it as soil that looks like coffee grounds. And that's exactly what it looked. I knew the second I saw that soil, it was a perfect description for it, because that's exactly what it looked like. And what you're looking at is worm castings, worm poop.
Wow.
And what happens is there's very little left to the soil structure at that point. So obviously, in the early stages, it's not a huge deal.
Right.
But as this problem continues, it becomes an enormous problem. So one of the places where this was found first in Wisconsin was at Olbrich Botanical Garden in Madison. And they've been dealing with this problem for a few years. And of course, the worms were probably there before they really realized what was going on. And this year they reported that they had a windstorm, and they had a whole stand of arborvitaes that were 5 years old. Big wind came out of the west, and all of a sudden the next day they looked, and all of the arborvitaes were leaning. And they went and looked, and it's because their roots aren't really even anchored, even though these are well-established trees. The director of horticulture at his name is Jeff Epping at Olbrich, said he's had these worms at his house for a long time, which makes sense because he's probably transporting plants back and forth. And he said there are places in his garden where he can dig his hand down into the soil, a foot down, but just by sticking his hand in the soil with no pressure whatsoever, because it's just granular. So he pulls up entire plants because there's nothing holding them in the soil anymore. So the concern is, obviously this is a concern for gardeners, because it will eventually makes plants very stressed. He said in the areas where the worm activity is worst in his garden, there's a huge problem with plants drying out. They can't handle drought because there's nothing there to hold moisture in.
Yeah.
But obviously this is a really big concern if this gets to be a real problem in forests, because this is the kind of thing that'll make trees fall down in windstorms that aren't that bad, and all sorts of other issues. So that's kind of the upshot of why they're bad. They're not like your regular worms. And I know when I first posted about this, I wrote a story about this on the blog when I first found it at the garden downtown. And I have since gotten confirmation from the DNR. I did go to our Department of Natural Resources just to confirm that I wasn't seeing things and that this was that worm. And they have confirmed that it is. And we actually did that I took some videos, and then we also found some more and sent them some samples, and they confirmed all that, which I knew. I mean, I just knew it, but it's always good to get confirmation with an invasive species. And our DNR is also tracking how these are spreading. So they're asking people to report when they find them in their gardens or anywhere else. So when I first wrote about that, people were like, oh, get over yourself. It's just a regular worm. And
I saw that.
and I understand. I mean, I am being a little dramatic about it, probably, because invasive species are scary at first. Because right now they have no idea what to do about these. That's the main problem. Right now there is no plan on how to deal with these. I just read an article last week. There are several companies that are working, and I think the university is working on coming up with some sort of control for these. I know one of the things they had tried was there is a product that's marketed as Early Bird, and it is some sort of, I want to say it's cottonseed meal. It's some sort of natural product that they actually have been marketing in golf courses for a long time. And you put it down and it kills worms in their early stages. And they've been trying that. This is for all kinds of earthworms, because golf courses don't like too many earthworms of any variety. Aren't good for any area anyways. Now, I had been told that wasn't as successful as they hoped it would be, but maybe they're working on that. So, but as of right now, there is no method of control for these. So that's why it's a little scary. The other thing, so I'll just tell you a little bit about what these things look like so that people can kind of keep an eye out for them. For me, the first thing I noticed is that these worms behave very differently from every other worm I've ever seen. They are quick. If you kind of unearth one, they quickly try to dive down again and get away from you. And most earthworms, I find, are sort of, they're kind of slugs. They're not doing anything real fast.
Yeah.
They also, if you poke them or touch them or agitate them, they writhe around like a snake. They are also one of the common names for them is snake worms. And that's the part where I get totally creeped out because I'm not a big fan of snakes.
Yeah.
And they they actually behave aggressively. It's creepy. They are thin and they are very shiny, kind of almost slimy looking, but they're shiny, and they actually are a little iridescent. And then the big thing that sets them apart from our earthworms is that they have now this is a very difficult word for me to pronounce, but basically I'll have to find the word. It's the clitellum, which is that little band that goes around a worm.
Right. That's a lighter colored band.
Exactly. So on these worms, that is continuous. It goes all the way around the worm, which is not the case with most other earthworms you find. And it tends to be white or very, very light. And it's much closer to the head of the worm than it normally is on other worms. So that's kind of another thing. For me, it was the iridescent thing that set them apart from any other worm I had ever seen. So that's kind of what you look for. And when you find them, it's not a great thing.
Yeah, because you posted this on the Garden Fork discussion group on Facebook, which people can, if you just go to Facebook and type in Garden Fork discussion group, it'll show up, and you can ask to join. And people are like, oh yeah, we call those night crawlers, and I'm like, no, you're not reading what she's saying here.
Yeah, it's a different thing, and it's a different thing because I think what it is that very few people have ever heard of an invasive worm. We just have worms, and we all assume that worms are really good.
Yep.
And of course, that's actually not the case. And it wasn't until I kind of dug deeper into this earthworm thing and this jumping worm thing when I kind of, we've been getting educated as master gardeners. They've been giving us a lot of information about this too. But it wasn't until recently that I learned that too many earthworms are not a good, of any variety, are not a good thing either. And there are some people who would prefer to not have any earthworms at all in their gardens because they can actually sometimes do more damage than good, which is all news to me because I was always under the impression like I would dig in my garden, and if I took up a big shovel full of soil and there was a bunch of worms in it, I would be like, yes, I am doing everything right because these earthworms want to live in my garden.
Yeah.
And maybe I shouldn't have been patting myself on the back quite as much.
Yeah, because worms, from what I understand, the original worms, the original pioneer worms, came across in the ballast of ships.
Yep. Yes, in the ballast of ships and with rocks and soil and all kinds of stuff that had come over from Europe.
Because they would bring the boats from Europe would come over and maybe not completely full, so they would put a lot of ballast in the bottom, and then they would empty that out to fill the hold or the hull with natural resource products from the Americas to go back to Europe.
Yep.
But also it seems that this worm has traveled because of potted plants, but also these plant swaps that people think they're doing a good thing by having a little garden get together and swapping plants from each other. And they've got some soil from their garden and stuck it in a pot with this plant. And little do they know that that worm egg or some worms are actually in that pot. And then you bring it to your garden.
Exactly. And that's kind of the sad thing because that's one of the best parts of gardening is I love sharing plants, and plants keep giving and you have to divide them and you can get such cool plants. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that I think for the time being, until they kind of get a handle on what to do about this, you have to be very, very careful about. So the life cycle of these worms basically is they do not overwinter in these northern areas. They're not hardy enough to overwinter, but they lay cocoons with a bunch of eggs in them. And by the way, they do not need any kind of partner to lay eggs. There's no sexual reproduction going on. It's all asexual reproduction.
Oh, great.
So one worm can create a whole bunch of babies. So they lay these cocoons, and the cocoons do overwinter in the garden, and they are like microscopic. You cannot find them. It's not like you can dig around your garden and look for the cocoons, because you'll never find them. And then, of course, they don't emerge until like mid to late June, which means that a lot of these plant swaps happen in spring, which means that there's no way to know whether those cocoons are in that soil or not. And then these worms can often create 2 generations in a season. So the reason I think we're finding them now is because these worms are at their biggest now. We're probably on the 2nd generation of worms right now, and they're all pretty big. And I think that's why I found them there. And actually, unfortunately, just yesterday, I found them in my own garden as well. So I think that's why we're finding them now, is at their largest right now, because they're probably getting ready to lay a whole bunch of eggs right now. So that is the problem, is that with these plant swaps, they can be hiding in basically any amount of dirt. So last year, a lot of the plant sales in Madison, which was kind of the first spot in the state of Wisconsin to really have a problem with these, almost every plant sale in Madison was canceled last year. And I know that our Master Gardener organization does do a plant sale with plants for members' gardens, and we spent a lot of time last year deciding whether we were going to have that sale or not, and spent a lot of time talking to the DNR about whether it was responsible to be doing that. And the DNR's advice to us was, unless you have members who, obviously anyone who knows they have them should not be sharing any plant material from their garden whatsoever. Because the important thing is that, yes, we have them, but the key with invasive species is always limit the spread. You're probably never going to eradicate it fully, but limiting the spread is the key to managing invasive species. So, the responsible thing to do is to not share any plants from your garden if you know you have them. The other thing you can do is you can actually root wash plants. So you can wash every bit of soil off of a plant, replant it in new potting mix, and then you could sell that plant. That, of course, is very labor intensive and kind of expensive. So that's why a lot of plant sales and plant swaps are probably should go on hold for a little while, at least in the areas in the country where this is known to be a problem. The other thing you're supposed to do when you find them is, you don't just want to let them be there to create more. So what you do is, I've been putting them in a plastic bag, and you solarize them, which is a nice way of saying you stick them in the sun till they cook in there, and then you throw them away. Because the other thing you don't want to do is throw them into the landfill, where they could potentially still be while they're still alive. And you want to make sure they're disgusting. Apparently, they really smell when they die. So it's all bad. None of it's good. Oh, the other thing is, the Wisconsin DNR is really on a campaign. They call it Arrive Clean, Leave Clean. So what they want people to do is, if you're transporting tools that you've used in other gardens, or even your shoes, they want you to clean those off, no dirt whatsoever on your tools or shoes or anything that's been in another garden. And before you leave the garden that you're working in, they want you to clean all that stuff off again and go back. And we're going to follow that at the garden that we work at downtown. And I'm actually going to, it's not going to be easy to do, but I'm going to do that in my own garden. Now, I've only found the worms in one part of my garden. These worms only travel, I think I read, 30 feet a year or something like that. So they will go somewhere on their own, but they don't go there fast. So it is possible that I may only have them in one part of my garden.
Right.
And obviously the odds are I'll get them in another part of my garden at some point. But if I can delay that, because perhaps they'll come up with a solution to this problem in the meantime. If I can delay that, that would be good. So I am actually going to try to do a better job about just working in one section of my garden and cleaning my tools and stuff before I move on to another section of my garden.
Wow.
Oh, and the other thing is how people are getting these is when I talked to the person at the DNR, he told me that they believe that a lot of these are coming in on materials brought in. And we believe that that's probably how we got them at the garden that I work at downtown. It probably came in on mulch that we bought, commercially available mulch, not bagged, but we bought bulk mulch. And the worms will not live in materials that have been heated beyond a certain degree, which all commercial mulch is supposed to be.
Right.
They require that. But, that stuff sits around. So if something else comes in, they heat it, and then it sits around in a pile until they sell it. So you never know. You just never really know whether that's going to be the case or not. And I don't think the DNR has the staff to run around and check every commercial composter's operation to make sure they're reaching 165 degrees or whatever the heat range is. So, my plan until I found them in my own garden was to not bring in any mulch. And I may have even gotten these. I did bring in the garden that I have them in. I bought some topsoil last year. They might have come in there, or they might have come from me working in that garden, or they might have come from a plant I picked up at a plant sale. I'll never know how they got there, but I think it's good for gardeners to start thinking about how they're sourcing their materials, and maybe for the time being, be as sort of self-sufficient as you can. So if you cut down a tree, and you've got someone there to cut down your tree, have somebody chip up your branches and use that as your mulch for the year instead of bringing in mulch, maybe.
Wow. All right.
I hate to be alarmed. I hate to be alarmist about these things because you know what? Invasive species are coming in all the time. And you know what? We move on. I'm just looking out my window right now at an ash tree, which is one of probably 15 in my yard that is basically dead now from emerald ash borer. And, we deal with these things. We move on. We learn from it. We do our best. And the next invasive species is just around the corner. I think we just have to do our best to be educated about it. Probably not freak out as much as I've been freaking out about these worms. If they didn't look so much like snakes and act so much like snakes, I wouldn't be as turned off by them as I am. But I really have this snake phobia thing, which is ridiculous because snakes are good, but still.
The problem here is that they're turning the soil into basically cat litter.
It's exactly it. Yep.
So then the trees are going to fall over. So whatever trees we replant, because we have the ash problem here as well, we're not going to be able to plant stuff because it won't stand up in the ground.
Exactly. So, it's one of those things I think we just all have to do our part and hope that that scientists and horticulturists can come up with some ways to control these in an effective manner so that our landscape isn't changed forever.
Well, I worked on a volunteer project yesterday to help combat a invasive species that I wanted to tell you all about.
So what was that?
Well, it was we have a county-wide, it's called the Housatonic Valley in Connecticut, which encompasses, I think, kind of a bigger area of Connecticut. The Housatonic River Valley has some area-wide state organizations, and one of them, they have some, I'm going to mangle the name, but it's like the Housatonic Valley Environmental Commission, I think. But they have some botanists on staff, and one of them was driving through our town. I'm hoping I can get her on the podcast, actually. And she noticed along one of our roads where there had been some work done on the utility pole. So a lot of heavy equipment coming in on the shoulder of the road, tearing up, like a 10-foot wide swath along this big hunk of road. So it's kind of overturned soil. Something I've never heard of before, it's called Japanese Stiltgrass. And it looks like a short little bamboo plant, maybe a foot and a half high, or it looks like kind of like a weak-looking wheat stalk, if you've ever seen that. And I never knew about it till I got this email from one of the town groups. And they were having a work party yesterday on Saturday in the morning. And they said, just please come meet us at 9 o'clock in the morning and we'll show you what to do. And it was all on kind of very short notice. It was kind of let's just try and do this before the stiltgrass goes to seed. And there were probably 15 people there. And I went, and in 2 minutes, they showed me they had a little cardboard fold out with some pictures of the grass in various stages and what to do. And we just pulled this grass out, as much of it as we could. There were a couple guys there that kind of were moving much faster than I was. But it was just neat to see a group of people that were concerned about something and trying to knock it back before it goes to seed. The concern is to keep it out of the streams in our town, which connect with the bigger rivers and into the Housatonic, because that's a really easy way for the seeds to spread. So we did a little volunteer thing, and it felt good.
Those community weed pulls are, they're great to do. Also, they make a huge impact. I mean, how many people did you have at that event, would you say?
Like 15 people there.
Yeah, so 15 people, think about how much 15 people can get done. In a short period of time, it's not a huge time commitment for anyone. Everyone does a little bit. And especially when you're talking about pulling plants before they go to seed, I mean, you've probably saved, hundreds of thousands of plants from being developed because you've gotten rid of that before their seed gets anywhere.
Yeah, and then the botanist lady, whose name I'm blanking on, I'm sorry, she said, well, after this, then the best thing to do is to burn them, if anyone has a flamethrower. And I'm like, I have a flamethrower.
Standing by to light anything on fire that needs being lit on fire, huh?
Well, I think it has to be supervised because, the woods are right there. So
well, that'd be good. There's a lot of weed pulls like that in our area too. In spring, a lot of the parks do garlic mustard weed pulls, and I know you're an advocate of eating your garlic mustard weed. I don't know if anyone's taking it home to have it in their salad or not. But we do a lot. There's a lot of those here, and I will say that I believe that the campaign to pull garlic mustard weed has actually really been helping, because I feel like I'm seeing a lot less of it around than I was 5 years ago. So I feel like it's actually really helping. The word has gotten out, people understand, and people are pitching in to help at parks and natural areas to make sure it doesn't completely take over.
Yeah, we're having garlic mustard move into our town, and is it called Asiatic bittersweet?
Sure, yeah.
This vine that wraps around trees and chokes the trees and then covers the tree canopy and kills the tree.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is it has a really, really pretty berry in the fall and winter. So people
like that for Christmas decorating.
Right. So one of my neighbors until very recently had it as an ornamental hedge in his front yard. So it was a vector for spreading the thing all over the place.
Right.
And then I helped my neighbor get rid of a lot of it around his pond, and I was cutting limbs of this bittersweet that were as thick as my arm with my chainsaw. And then I see now, 2 months later, there are new sprouts coming off that bittersweet that I cut back almost to the ground. So you have to go back and hit it again, or hit that green growth with Roundup or something.
The problem with these sort of non-native species, they're often introduced as an ornamental, which, by the way, garlic mustard weed was introduced as an edible crop from Europe, where it doesn't take over there like it does here. And, the problem is they get out and no one understands how they're going to behave in this climate. And then often they are things that reseed. Really that's often the problem, is that they reseed so prolifically that the problem quickly gets out of control.
All right, so let's talk about something positive now.
What? That'd be great.
I put up a new video about, actually it'll post later today, but the podcast will be out already, but what to do with your beehives if you have a honey super still on there and the temperatures are dropping and the bees haven't capped all the honey that you were hoping to harvest. Because uncapped honey isn't cured enough. The water content is still too high. So what to do with that? So you're trying to get the honeybees you're trying to induce them to pull the honey out of those frames that bring it back down into the brood super. So I made a video about that. And it ended up that there was actually more capped honey than uncapped honey. So we had a little bit of a honey harvest, so that was nice.
Oh, that's great. I just bought some honey at our farmer's market yesterday, but I go to a specific stand there because he has hives that he keeps hives at my neighbor's house, which is kind of a cool thing, I think, for people to think about doing if they can't raise their own bees and don't want to get into all that's involved in that. Because like you've said a million times, people think sometimes it's easier than it is, and there's more that goes into it. You really have to educate yourself. If you don't have the time or interest in doing that, some places, some beekeepers will allow you to put hives on your property. And of
Yep.
course, the benefit to you is that you get to, enjoy bees, and your crops get you got pollinators everywhere. And I imagine they probably give people some free honey. But I always look for that specific honey because I see those honeybees in my garden all the time, and I sort of feel like it's my honey. I sort of feel like, feel like I kind of made that honey, and he doesn't give me a discount because of that, but I feel like he should.
It's so much work to harvest honey, man.
Yeah, and they're doing it on a big scale. They've got hives all over the county, and it's neat because they always talk about the different flavor profiles
Yep.
from one to the other. And even yesterday when I went to buy honey, I told him what location I wanted, and he said, "Well, do you want the summer harvest or the fall harvest?" And I said, "I don't know, which do I want?" And he said, "I think you want fall." So I bought a big jar of the fall harvest, and I'll try that soon and see how that tastes. But I think it's so much fun to buy honey or consume honey that is from near me. I just think because there are very few things that are quite that local unless you're growing it in your own backyard.
Cool. The other thing I did, we have a video. I went to my sister's house, and we had to. She wanted me to hang this tool rack in her garage, and she has a cinder block wall in her garage. So we made a video about drilling into cinder block, and that was kind of fun.
Oh, that's not easy to do, is it?
Well, you have to know more about cinder blocks than you might want to. But and the other cool thing is, I just think everyone should own what's called a hammer drill, because they're actually, I mean, the homeowner hammer drill is affordable. For $60, you can get a really nice one. I mean, it's not a daily driver. You're not using it every day, but when you need to go into cement or concrete or cinder blocks or brick, it's the tool to have. So.
Yeah, we don't have one of those, and you've talked about them quite a bit on the podcast, and maybe that's a good Christmas gift around here or something, because I feel like that's missing from our tool arsenal.
Yeah, because now, your husband has the home office downstairs, and if he wants to hang something on that foundation wall.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And it's also, hammer drills function as a regular rotary drill as well, and I'll link in the show notes here to the one I own. And there's sometimes you just need the torque of a corded drill to go through, like you were drilling through metal or something. Cordless drills, they can kind of peter out, or they just don't have the torque that you need, the power that you need to go through that kind of thing. So it's handy to have.
So my favorite thing to do with our cordless drill is I put a bulb auger on it, and then I plant all my daffodils and my alliums.
Yeah.
With that, so we'll be doing that in the next couple weeks. So do you think a hammer drill would be really good for that, or does it make no difference for something like that?
The hammer drill would be overkill for that.
Well, I'm not opposed to overkill sometimes when it comes to tools.
No, I mean, whatever you want. That works just fine. So.
Yeah, that's mostly what I use the cordless drill for, is the bulb auger, which is the only way to plant bulbs as far as I'm concerned. Because last year we cranked out 400 daffodil bulbs in probably an hour, or maybe a little less, with the two of us. And my husband would, drill the hole with the auger, and I just follow behind and put the daffodils in and cover it up with dirt, and we were good to go.
Now, are those native plants, Aaron?
Daffodils? Heck no. They are absolutely not native. They are as non-native as you can probably get, but they do naturalize nicely, and they're good. And as far as I know, they haven't done anything bad yet. So.
All right. Well, that should do it for this episode. I think we got everyone thinking about worms now, and I'll link in the show notes here to Aaron's website, which is theimpatientgardener.com, which has a ton of cool stuff on it. And Aaron actually posts stuff a lot, as opposed to me, which I kind of forget and then do it later kind of thing. So I subscribe to your email list, Aaron, so I know whenever you have a new post out, I get an email about it, and I like that.
Oh, thank you. That's great. I'm glad you do that. I appreciate that. And I subscribe to your emails, and I love your weekly newsletters, which are usually weekly.
Yeah. All right, everyone. You can find us at youtube.com/gardenfork. Oh, and if you want to consider supporting us, you could use our Amazon store, which is amazon.com/shop/gardenfork. That's a really great thing. Or consider becoming a patron with our Patreon campaign. So, Aaron, thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I always appreciate talking to you.